There are people who walk into a room and without saying a word, shift the atmosphere. Not because of anything they do, but because of who they are. Their presence is a silent revelation, and for many, that's too much to bear. You see, the first sign that your aura is too powerful is that you attract the truth and repel the false. When someone's energy is clean, it functions like a mirror. Those who come with hidden agendas, unspoken envy, or counterfeit kindness feel exposed, and exposure is uncomfortable. So instead of changing, they withdraw or turn defensive. It's not your fault, it's your light showing them their shadows. Second, your silence speaks louder than noise. In a world that shouts for attention, your quiet confidence unsettles those addicted to approval. You're not loud, yet you are unmistakably seen. You're not argumentative, yet your convictions are unshakable. People aren't sure why they can't ignore you, but deep down they sense that your presence carries a weight their performance cannot match. The third sign? You don't follow the crowd, because you were never meant to. You walk alone not because you lack companionship, but because you value direction over distraction. Many confuse your solitude with sadness, but you've simply learned that the crowd is often the loneliest place of all. You have found contentment in your own soul, and that unnerves those who depend on noise to avoid the silence inside them. Fourth, you make people reflect on themselves. You don't mean to challenge them, your very existence does. You speak with clarity when others hide behind confusion. You forgive with grace when others hold grudges like shields. You walk with purpose while others drift. And in doing so, you force people to face questions they've avoided. Why do I fear stillness? Why do I seek applause? Why do I feel uneasy around peace? Fifth, you live with integrity, not for impression. You don't bend to trends or trim your convictions to stay liked. And for many, that's offensive. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they've spent their lives adjusting themselves to please others. And when you don't do the same, it feels like rebellion to them. But you aren't rebelling, you're simply rooted. 6. You are spiritually grounded. You aren't chasing validation or popularity. You're chasing purpose. And people who've built their identity on external praise won't know how to relate to you. Your aura isn't loud, but it's unshakable. You cannot be manipulated easily. That threatens people who only know how to control, not connect. And then there's the 7th sign. You listen deeply. You don't just hear words. You hear what's unspoken. You sense the tension behind the smile, the insecurity behind the boast, the fatigue behind the mask. This discernment is a gift, but it's not always welcome. People fear being seen before they're ready. And when you see them without judgment, they don't know what to do with the kindness. 8th, you hold space without filling it. You don't dominate conversations. You don't make everything about you, but when you speak, it has weight. And that alone shifts the atmosphere. In a world addicted to attention, your restraint is mysterious and often misunderstood. 9th, you rise without stepping on others. Your elevation comes from effort, not exploitation. Your growth comes from pain, not pretense. People who've climbed by compromise cannot comprehend your ascent. They call it luck, but it's legacy. They call it chance, but it's choice. 10th, you value depth over display. Your soul speaks louder than your status. You care more about meaning than image. And because you're not trying to impress, you end up inspiring. But this inspiration often threatens those who built their lives on shallow applause. 11th, you are at peace with not being understood. You've stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And that peace, ironically, disturbs them more than your silence ever could. It tells them, I'm not here for approval, I'm here for truth. 12th, you're not moved by fear. You're led by faith, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet strength that walks through fire and says, "Even if I fall, I rise again." That kind of courage, that kind of resilience is not easy to watch, especially for those who crumble at the slightest storm. You love purely. You care without control. You give without strings. And in a world where love has become a transaction, your sincerity feels foreign. Some will embrace it, others will run from it. But know this, your aura was not made to be accepted by all. It was made to awaken a few. If people distance themselves, mock you, or feel uneasy around you, don't dim your light. It's not your responsibility to make others comfortable. Your responsibility is to remain true, remain grounded, and remain powerful. Even if your power is too much for most to handle, you attract the truth and repel the false. It's not that you go looking for lies, but lies cannot stay where you stand. Your aura, your inner energy, your invisible force is calibrated for honesty. And so when people approach you with hidden motives, they feel an unexpected weight in their chest. You haven't accused them. You haven't called them out. But suddenly they feel like they're standing in front of a mirror they didn't ask for. That mirror is you, and in that mirror they see not what they want to be seen, but what actually is. This is not your doing, it is your being. You attract the truth because you live in truth, and truth has no tolerance for disguise. When someone with false intentions enters your space, they may not even understand why they feel uneasy. They may laugh a little too loud, talk a little too much, avoid your eyes, or over-explain themselves. That's because their spirit knows what their mind has yet to acknowledge. Your presence is not a place to hide. It's a place that strips away what is fake. They sense it, even before they admit it. This is why your relationships are few, but they are deep. Why your conversations are rare but unforgettable, because people either rise to meet you or retreat to avoid you. Your aura does not bend for convenience. It demands alignment. And not everyone is ready for alignment. Some are addicted to performance. Some are lost in their own masks. And when they see you, not only unmasked but unashamed, they panic, because what they see is something they've buried in themselves. Truth, unfiltered and alive. This is also why people sometimes accuse you of being too intense or too serious. What they mean is, you are not superficial. You cannot pretend. You cannot play the game of smiles that hide resentment, compliments that hide envy, friendships that hide competition. You cannot fake what you don't feel, and you cannot ignore what you do. So when you speak, people feel it in their bones. Not because you're trying to impact them, but because you've made peace with your own soul. And that peace unsettles their chaos. It is not your job to make yourself more tolerable for those hiding from themselves. You weren't made to entertain falsehoods. You were made to reveal what's real. You don't chase people, you notice them. Then the ones who are hiding will either open up or shut down. But they cannot stay neutral in your presence. Your energy demands a choice, truth or avoidance. You might notice that gossip dies around you. It fizzles mid-sentence. People who love to criticize others suddenly grow quiet. Not because you silence them with words, but because your spirit doesn't feed off the same bitterness. You don't validate drama. You don't feed insecurity. You don't reward falsehood with attention. And so those who thrive on pretense begin to wither when they enter your space. You have likely lost people not because of what you did, but because of what you represent. Some walked away because they could not maintain their image around you. They didn't know how to lie with their presence when yours was already telling the truth. Others tried to dim your light because it made their shadows obvious. But remember, your light is not a weapon, it is a revelation. and revelations are not always received kindly. You attract those who are ready to be honest with themselves, even if they are afraid. You become a safe space for those who have nothing to hide. These are the people who stay. These are the people who grow with you, and they will tell you, not always in words, but with the peace you feel when you're with them, you made it safe for me to be real. That is your power. Not to force truth on others, but to make truth so natural that lies cannot survive in your orbit. So when you notice people pull back, don't chase them. When others fumble their words around you, don't question yourself. When you're misunderstood or called too much, you're not too much. You're just more than some are ready to handle. Your aura is tuned for truth, and truth is a filter. Not everyone passes through it. Let them walk away. Let the false peel off. What remains will be true, and that's the only kind of connection your soul was ever designed to keep. Your silence speaks louder than words. When your presence commands more attention than someone else's performance, you become a mirror not only of truth, but of power. Not the loud kind that demands submission, but the quiet kind that draws respect. And in that quiet, people hear what they've been trying to drown out. Your silence is not empty. It is full of conviction, of clarity, of unseen strength. And that, for many, is disorienting. You don't speak just to be heard. You don't fill the air with noise to feel significant. Your words are intentional, and your silence is sacred. That's why people often talk too much around you. It's not that you ask for explanations. They feel compelled to offer them, because silence in your presence feels different. It is not awkward, it is not passive, it is alive, weighty, unignorable. You've likely seen it happen. When you enter a room, some people grow louder, as if trying to assert themselves over the quiet force you bring. But it never works, because your silence isn't about absence, it's about presence. When you are quiet, the insecure feel their own noise echo back at them, because your stillness makes them confront their restlessness. Your calm makes them notice their chaos. It's not a game you're playing, it's a state you live in. Your silence doesn't beg for attention, but it commands respect. People notice when you speak because you don't compete to be heard, and that alone separates you. In a world where everyone is performing, your refusal to act makes you powerful. You don't over-explain, you don't overshare, you don't feel the need to prove. That unnerves people who rely on validation to exist. They don't know how to connect without words, but you do. You connect with presence, with authenticity, with stillness that cuts deeper than sound. And because of that, many misunderstand you. They'll say you're cold, or aloof, or difficult to approach. What they really mean is, they cannot decipher you. You are unreadable to those who only know how to read reactions. You don't give them the performance they're used to. You don't dance around discomfort. You don't fill every silence with approval. And in that absence of affirmation, people begin to feel their own insecurities surface. You've probably noticed this in conversations. Someone asks for your opinion, not because they want the truth, but because they want agreement. And when you pause, even for a moment, they panic. They try to fill in the silence with reasons, justifications, or laughter. But your pause wasn't judgment. It was discernment. It was the sacred space where truth could form. Yet they couldn't bear the weight of not being immediately reassured, because your silence didn't echo their ego, it reflected their uncertainty. There is nothing passive about the silence you carry. It is deeply active. It's the silence of a soul that has gone through fire and come out clean. A silence that has nothing to prove because it already knows who it is. You've seen storms inside yourself that most people avoid in others. That kind of silence cannot be faked. It is born from confrontation, not with others, but within. People sense this. That's why you are often mistaken for intimidating. Not because you carry aggression, but because you carry clarity. You are not loud, but you are present. And in a noisy world, presence is threatening. Most people don't know how to sit with themselves, let alone someone who already has. Your silence isn't judgment, but it feels like it to those still judging themselves. You are not withdrawn, you are reserved. You don't withhold to manipulate, you withhold to protect. Your silence is not a lack, it is a filter. It reveals who is comfortable with stillness and who is only comfortable with noise, and you've learned to trust it. You've learned that the most valuable truths are not shouted, they are carried, quietly, consistently, and with deep conviction. People may forget the words you say, but they never forget the feeling of being in your silence. Because in that silence, they either found peace or they found themselves exposed, and either way, they were changed. You don't need the crowd. You stand alone. When your silence begins to reveal what others hide from, and your truth begins to repel what others pretend to be, you start to notice a natural separation taking place. The circle grows smaller. The rooms feel quieter. The invitations slow down, but you're not troubled. Because your soul has already made peace with solitude. You've walked alone long enough to know it is not a curse, it is a calling. And the deeper your truth, the less room there is for noise. You don't chase company. You don't gather people just to feel full. You've learned that the wrong crowd can make you feel lonelier than being alone ever could. That's why your energy doesn't fit everywhere. It's not snobbishness. It's discernment. You are careful with where you go, who you trust, and what you allow near your spirit. And this care, this spiritual selectiveness, makes you stand out. Because while others seek to be surrounded, you've chosen to be centered. You've experienced the moment where a room full of people made you feel more invisible than an empty one ever could. And it taught you proximity does not equal connection. Volume does not equal value. Attention does not equal alignment. So you stopped searching for the crowd and started listening for the call within. That call is what led you into deeper waters, into more silent spaces, and ultimately into more power. People don't understand this kind of detachment. They misread it. They say you're distant, they say you're hard to reach, but what they don't know is that your distance is not withdrawal, it's wisdom. It's the natural result of living with intentionality. When your energy becomes costly, not everyone can afford your presence, and that's not arrogance, that's protection. This is also why people project their fears onto you. They'll say things like, "You think you're better than us," or "You're too good to be around people now." But you don't think you're better. You just refuse to be surrounded by noise that drowns out your purpose. You've outgrown shallow talk. You've lost the taste for validation. You're not running from people, you're walking toward peace. And peace often walks alone. Your independence isn't born out of pride, it's born out of pruning. You've had to let go of people you loved, spaces you once felt at home in, and comforts that once gave you identity. But in shedding those layers, you found yourself. You no longer ask, "Who's with me?" but "Am I where I'm meant to be?" Because presence without purpose is just distraction. When you walk alone, something else happens too. You begin to see clearly. Without the noise of opinions, the glare of attention, or the fog of expectations, you develop spiritual clarity. You begin to discern the difference between loudness and leadership, popularity and purpose, influence and integrity. You no longer want to be seen, you want to see. You want to perceive, not perform. And that clarity can be lonely, but it is in that loneliness that your power matures. You learn how to make decisions without approval. You learn how to carry pain without performance. You learn how to celebrate yourself when no one else claps. And once you've tasted that strength, the crowd no longer impresses you. You no longer chase noise. You listen for alignment. That's also why people who still live for applause can't understand your stillness. They think silence means failure. They think being unseen means being irrelevant. But you know better. You've learned that the loudest moments are often the most lost. You know that the greatest growth happens in hidden places, in valleys, in deserts, in silence. That's where roots are built. So you choose the path less traveled, not because it's glamorous, but because it's honest. Because your soul cannot bear to follow what is fake. You walk alone because you refuse to compromise. And that decision will never be easy, but it will always be worth it. Because even if no one sees it, even if no one praises it, you will know. You stayed loyal to the truth of who you are. You're seen in your presence, and it terrifies them when you've walked alone long enough to hear your own thoughts clearly. When your silence has become more honest than most people's words. And when truth has become your only compass, something strange begins to happen. You begin to see people, not their masks, not their roles, not their curated stories, but their souls. And even when they try to hide, your presence sees through. You don't need people to tell you who they are. You read their hesitations, their eyes, the way they deflect compliments or avoid directness. You hear the fear behind their anger. You sense the sadness behind their arrogance. You pick up on the weight in their laugh and the tremble in their confidence. Because you don't just hear words, you feel them. You don't just observe behavior, you interpret energy. And that ability, natural, unforced, undeniable, is unsettling for many. Most people don't know how to be seen. They've spent years building an image to survive in the world. They've crafted a version of themselves to earn love, to feel safe, to be accepted. But when they enter your presence, that image begins to flicker, not because you attack it, but because you don't believe it. You don't buy into surface-level stories. You speak to the part of them that's buried underneath. And that's what makes them tremble. They won't always admit it, but their body language tells you. They shift. They grow quiet. They change the subject. They suddenly want to leave or laugh or talk about anything but themselves. You haven't judged them, but being seen without their armor makes them feel naked. And in a world where people wear emotional masks, like clothes, that kind of vulnerability feels like danger. That's why people both admire and avoid you. You feel like home to their soul, but like a threat to their ego. Because the version of themselves they perform in public cannot survive in your presence. You don't give attention to personas. You don't feed roles. You feed truth. And only the real version of them can sit at your table. You've probably seen it in friendships. Someone pours their heart out to you, saying they've never felt so understood, but later they pull away, not because you hurt them, but because you saw them. And for someone who's never fully seen themselves, being seen by another feels like standing under a light too bright. They say you're intense or too deep, but what they mean is you know. You know more than you're supposed to. You feel what they cannot say. And that terrifies them. You've likely had people confess things to you they didn't plan to say. There's something about your presence that breaks through barriers. They begin to speak without knowing why. Something inside them trusts you, even before they consciously do, because your spirit doesn't judge, it listens. And your silence doesn't pressure, it welcomes. But that's exactly what makes it so hard for some to stay. Being around you feels like therapy, but not everyone is ready for healing. Healing costs comfort. Healing exposes wounds. Healing disrupts illusions. And your energy, without trying, brings all of that to the surface. So they run, they ghost, they sabotage, not because you did something wrong, but because being with you felt too right. You don't need people to explain who they are. You already know. And in knowing, you offer something the world rarely does. Space. A sacred space where masks are not required. A sacred space where they can finally breathe as themselves. But freedom is frightening to those who've lived in cages. Even if the door is open, some still cling to the bars, because the cage, at least, is familiar. So your gift becomes your filter. You are not for the many. You are for the ready. Those who are ready to be seen without shame. Those who are done pretending. Those who crave real, even when it's raw. And when those people find you, they will not flinch. They will not run. They will stay. Because being seen by you won't feel like exposure. It will feel like coming home. You trigger the deep parts of people they've spent years avoiding. When someone has spent most of their life carefully building walls to protect their inner wounds, your presence becomes a quiet storm to that structure. Not because you attack it, but because your authenticity exposes the fiction. You are real in a world full of armor, and the moment your energy touches theirs, the vibration shifts. Something deeper gets stirred. And it's not always welcomed. You don't have to say much. In fact, it's not what you say, it's what you don't say. Your demeanor doesn't push, it simply reflects. And yet, in that reflection, they start to see themselves not as they wish to be, but as they actually are. For someone who's spent years hiding from that view, it can feel like emotional whiplash. You don't try to trigger anything, that's never your goal. You walk in peace, but the peace you carry becomes a contrast to their chaos. The grounding you embody confronts their disconnection. You live in a reality most people are still running from. And when they stand next to you, they sense the difference. Not in words, but in soul. Your presence invites them to come back to themselves, and that's terrifying for anyone who doesn't know who they are without their wounds. It's not uncommon for people to feel angry around you without knowing why, or defensive, or nervous, or suddenly quiet. It's not always personal, it's spiritual. You've activated something they buried, a childhood memory, an unresolved trauma, an identity crisis, a suppressed dream. Your spirit knocked on a door they locked years ago, and now it's opening, not because you forced it open, but because you live so freely the lock couldn't hold. And sometimes they lash out, not because you're wrong, but because you're right. Your truth touched a lie they've depended on. Your confidence challenged the role they've been playing. Your stillness made them question their performance. That's why the reaction often comes with confusion. They'll feel something intense, but won't be able to explain it. They'll blame you, then miss you. They'll avoid you, then talk about you. Because something about your aura changed something in them, and they don't know whether to love you for it or hate you for it. You don't retaliate. You don't react. Because you've seen this before. It's a cycle that truth bringers know too well. The rejection isn't always because you're too much, but because you're too clear. Clarity exposes confusion. Truth disrupts comfort. And your light makes it harder for others to stay in shadows they once called home. That's why people often push you away, only to return later, after the dust has settled, after the lie has cracked, after the truth they once resisted becomes the freedom they now seek. You've probably noticed that people often come back with apologies they can't fully explain, or with confessions they didn't plan to make. It's not manipulation, it's resonance. You hold a frequency that stays with them even after you've gone. It echoes in their decisions. It whispers during their silence. It shows up in the mirror when they're finally honest with themselves. And when they return, it's not just to you, it's to themselves. Because your energy didn't just reveal them, it reminded them. It's hard being the mirror. It's painful being the one who triggers growth you don't even ask for. But you've learned that being misunderstood is part of being aligned, that being resented is sometimes the cost of being real, and that not everyone is rejecting you. Some are rejecting the part of themselves you awakened. So you no longer chase closeness. You trust resonance. You've let go of explaining yourself. You've stopped overgiving to stay liked. You've stopped softening your truth to avoid reactions. Because you understand now, your energy will always stir something. For the sleeping, it will feel like disruption. For the seekers, it will feel like awakening. But in both cases, your job is not to manage how they feel. It's to remain who you are. You're not intimidating. They're just not ready to rise. It's not your tone. It's not your posture. It's not your words. It's your energy that disrupts people's comfort. And because they haven't yet developed the strength to sit with themselves honestly, they project their discomfort onto you. They label it intimidation. But intimidation is not about what you carry. It's about what they lack. You are not harsh. You are just whole. And wholeness can feel threatening to those still stitched together by validation. You've learned to speak with quiet conviction, not loud, not boastful, but grounded. Yet even your silence is loud to those unsure of their worth. When you walk into a room, your posture says, "I know who I am." And that confidence unsettles those who are still negotiating their identity with the world around them. You didn't come to compete, but your presence feels like competition to those who are still performing. They'll say you're too much, that you're too confident, too deep, too intense. But what they're really saying is, you make me feel small, and I don't know how to sit with that without blaming you. But you didn't shrink them. They haven't yet grown into the parts of themselves you naturally reflect. You've just done the work. And work, when witnessed by someone still avoiding it, will always feel threatening. They want to be near you because your strength is magnetic. But they fear closeness because your strength is also revealing. You don't even have to call them out. Your discipline, your peace, your honesty, it all exposes the parts they've kept hidden. You force nothing, yet everything shifts around you. Because the vibration you hold is rooted in self-awarenessness, and that awareness strips away pretense without effort. They'll say you're judgmental, but you've judged no one. You've merely chosen not to pretend. You don't make others feel less. Your refusal to play small reminds them that they've been doing so. You don't dim your light, and that offends those who've silenced theirs. So instead of rising to meet the reflection, they retreat. They mock, they gossip, they try to bring you down so they don't have to rise up. And yet, you don't respond. You don't chase understanding. You've outgrown needing everyone to get it. Because not everyone is meant to walk beside you. You're not here to make people comfortable. You're here to stay aligned. And sometimes your alignment is their disruption. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. You've likely had people enter your life filled with admiration, drawn to your light, only to later turn cold. It wasn't because they stopped liking you. It's because being close to you meant facing themselves. And not everyone is ready for that. Some prefer the illusion of growth over the responsibility of it. And when your consistency exposes their avoidance, they pull away. You are not intimidating, you are integrated. And integration, when mind, soul, and spirit are aligned, radiates a power that the fragmented fear. You are not aggressive, you are awake, and wakefulness confronts the sleepwalkers. You are not arrogant, you are anchored, and anchoring feels like resistance to those still drifting. It's tempting to soften your edges, to make others feel less uncomfortable, but you've tried that before. You dimmed your light, over-explained your heart, minimized your calling, and none of it made them stay longer or love you more. All it did was distance you from yourself. So now you stay tall. Not in pride, but in purpose. You let your presence speak without apology. You no longer try to be easy to handle. You're not meant to be digestible for those unwilling to expand. You are not harsh, you are clear. You are not proud, you are planted. You are not loud, you are luminous. And the world will always wrestle with brightness until it learns to stop blaming the sun for its own closed eyes. So you walk forward, carrying your strength without apology. You don't shrink to soothe others' egos. You don't soften truth to win approval. You know now that being too much only means you're no longer too little. And if your presence triggers them, it's not your fault. It's their invitation. Whether they accept it or run from it is not your burden to carry.